I think the only thing that's more frustrating than not having baseball, not having an idea of when we're going to be able to watch Cubs or White Sox baseball is the way these negotiations are going on. 15 minutes meeting here, 2-hour meeting here. We're moving into this day. We've had setbacks. We've moved forward. And all it does is it upsets the fan base. And here on the Sports Cubicle, we keep talking about the mess that is these labor negotiations in Major League Baseball. It's Devin Tingle, Dan Marver, Paul Chivari, and myself, Mike Mercado, and Paulie here, who covers the sport like a blanket. Make sure you check out his work over at the Baseball Weekend Journal. You know, you've been trying to make sense out of this over the last few weeks, and then especially the last few days. The way that this has just been moving, and there seems to be progress one moment, and then there is just this setback this other moment, and it's tweet by tweet, post by post. Paulie, can you make sense of anything that's happening in these labor negotiations?
Short answer, no. Long answer, I could try. I think there's definitely a sense of urgency just based on the fact that, as we're discussing this in the middle of the week, that these two sides, have met every single day this week, when in the previous 12 weeks, I think they only met like a half dozen times, and most of it has been in February. They really sat on their hands through the month of December, most of January, and kind of played a little bit back and forth in February. But now that the season is pretty much on the line here, at least the start of the season is on the line here, we should be talking about spring training. In an alternate universe, Mike, we should be talking about spring training, how the players have already reported, how the teams are looking, the final rosters are kind of being set with free agency, which guys are probably going to crack the club for the March 31st opening day. But none of that exists right now. We don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is that if there's not a deal in place by tomorrow, February 28th, we know that the season is going to start canceling games. The Major League Baseball has said if they have to, they're going to start canceling regular season games. And I really don't think they're bluffing, because think about it. On the table might be an expanded postseason, which the league feels is necessary to generate more revenue for the players, which is what they want. And if there's an expanded playoffs and 162 games, and you were supposed to have a March 31st start time without any clear knowledge of what October was supposed to look like, what are these guys supposed to do? Play it Thanksgiving? Are we talking about neutral venues now for the World Series just so that we don't have to play it in a blizzard? So, I don't know how far this is going to go, and I don't know who's going to blink first. The leverage is always with the owners because they have the money. I mean, they, even though they want to make their profits at the same time, they have way more money than the players, so I think they can afford a loss more than certain players. Now, maybe the richest players don't have to worry about a season, because if they've already been paid significant amounts of money in their past, then they don't have to worry about not getting paid this season. It's the little guy and the guys that are struggling year to year to crack a roster, or the veterans that have been around for a while living year to year with their contracts. Those are the guys that are going to be affected the most by this. And so we're going to see in the next week if this is going to lead to anything, or if this is going to be more of a game of chicken.
And you bring that up about the little guy, and there's been reporting of what they want the minimum to be. And we're talking about anywhere from $640,000 to $775,000. And, this is, obviously a jump up, but we've seen the way that minor league facilities, minor league players are treated. We've seen it. We talk about it all the time. Now, I don't like to sound like sound like somebody who believes in a lot of conspiracy theories, a conspiracy theorist, but I think the one thing that I believe, and I highly suggest people listen to Dave Sampson. He used to be an executive over at the Florida Marlins teams that won 2 different World Series, one very close to home here, and we don't speak about those days. But the one thing that I think I learned from him and listening to him on the Dan Levitard show on his own podcast, these baseball owners know how to bleed a stone dry. And I believe they already know the exact date they need to start playing baseball, the amount of games they can miss that they could still make their entire revenue. Now, they're going to tell us that they want to hit that March 31st date. That is very important to them. But we all know it's all about the TV dollar and, more importantly, the playoff dollar. It's the reason why they want more playoff teams. Now, I may enjoy there being more playoff teams, keeping teams available and in it later on in the season. But I'm also not naive to understand how much money goes into that, how much revenue you make for your team doing that. And I believe these owners, if it were going to really cost them something that hurts their pockets, they wouldn't miss one game. They would get there on time. They would make sure that they're playing baseball on time. I think they know the exact date, whether that's March 31st, whether that's April 30th, whether that's June 31st, whether that's July 1st, whatever the case may be. They know what they need to hit to get that money. And on top of it, I think they believe, this is just me kind of putting the pieces together. I think they understand that if baseball was created today, they wouldn't start with 162 games. They wouldn't have a lot of the rules that they've implemented over the years because it's an old game, and that's okay. It's okay the way the game is. But if you're looking at what they're trying, the existential crisis that this sport is trying to live through, it's all based on one thing, that it's a sport that is of its time, and they're trying to change the wheel. And I think that this is how complicated it is, that bottom line, bottom dollar, they want the sport to be faster. They want it to be more consumable, but they also want to have all the cards on their side. And the owners are doing that right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's how these sort of negotiations work. No one really wants to relent, but of course you have to find a common ground. Compromise doesn't necessarily have to mean that both sides have to find the exact middle. Mm-hmm. It just means that they have to find something in the middle. I think the players union hurt themselves 5 years ago by agreeing to things very quickly. The contention that they're experiencing now was building and building and building over the years, even beyond the last collective bargaining agreement. And I think I expected the last CBA to go really long, and they agreed in a matter of hours. It was like a matter of like 2 or 3 days that they knocked it out in the offseason. No one even really noticed. But we knew, and you and I talked about this several times in our conversations outside of the Sports Cubicle about how, man, this 2021 to 2022 collective bargaining agreement is going to be a very contentious negotiation. And here we are. And I didn't really expect it to jeopardize the season in any way, but I'm not surprised at all that we're at this point. So, I think you're right that the owners know the date in their heads of when D-Day is for them, where we have to have a season or we're all going to take a big hit here. And we saw that based on the way they negotiated in 2020. Because if we remember from the negotiations in 2020, during the pandemic that canceled spring training and delayed the start of the season until late July, the players wanted to do a longer season. First, it was 120 games. The league rejected it. Then it was 80 games, doing a perfect half season, half pay. The league rejected it. The league played chicken all the way until they last possibly could, which was down to 60 games. So, what we ended up seeing was that the owners can live. Oh, I've got my son here joining me now. Hi, Soren.
Hey, look at that. He's finally made his debut on the Sports Cubicle. All right.
Little man's joining the conversation.
The only
right
good
now.
thing about baseball conversation is when the Z-Man finally showed up.
Well, hey, and this is maybe a little bit of a symbolism or a metaphor here with my son barging in. This is a generation that I want to raise on baseball. Mm-hmm. And this ultimately the fans are getting hurt. Yep. In 1994, I was old enough to experience the MLB strike and how the MLB strike took me away from the game for a while. As a 12-year-old kid, I loved baseball, and I was hurt by it so much to the point that I didn't come back to baseball until probably the summer of 98 with McGuire and Sosa. And then ultimately the kids can play White Sox of 1999 and then 2000 when they had success.
Paulie,
so like when you think of these kids, I mean, my son is way too young to understand what's going on with the labor negotiations. But what it's going to be, though, is this going to be a product worth selling to the next generation? Is this generation going to be interested in baseball? Is this generation even going to appreciate it the way that the older generations do? So, when I think of these negotiations and I think about the fan, I think about my son and how will I want to raise him on baseball? Am I going to be so burnt out on being a White Sox fan and being a baseball fan? Will I want to teach him about at least not so much teach him about the game, but teach him about rooting for a team? I mean, I think the game itself is beautiful, and I'll watch Nippon professional baseball. I'll watch Latin American, the Caribbean series, and the Roberto Clemente League. I'll watch any baseball that's given to me. I think the game itself is beautiful. I don't have to watch Major League Baseball and appreciate Major League Baseball. It's just unfortunate because the best of the best come to the United States to play. And right now we're at a point now where the future of the game is at stake here, whether the owners or the players realize it. It's the fans right now that are getting really upset about this. And if you're talking about opening day being delayed, if you're talking about any of the season in jeopardy, you're going to have fans starting to walk away from the game.
Paulie, and this is something you bring up, whether it's raising your kids, whether it's anybody introducing the sport to them, they may not even have a choice in the sense of how they want to consume it. When you think about it, the way the sports calendar moves so fast, by the time you know it, if baseball, let's say, misses March, misses all of April, you're then getting into the NFL draft, the NBA playoffs, training camp, OTAs. Like, by the time you know it, you're no longer an important story. And we're seeing this across all of sports. We talked about kids. This isn't just a baseball problem. People, and we want to say the youth, but this is people's attention spans. People don't watch sports the way our generation did. They're not sitting there for 2 hours, 2 to 6 hours, whatever the sport may be. They're consuming things differently. And if baseball is not careful, unlike, let's say, some of these other sports that at least at the very least try to keep up with whatever the trends are, baseball's not doing that. And I think that's what you and I are going to continue to talk about. And I highly suggest everybody keep tuned to the Baseball Weekend Journal every weekend to up-to-date news. Baseball needs to be careful. Major League Baseball specifically needs to be careful. Baseball will never go away. But don't ever think a league can't drop from first to last. Boxing was America's pastime. Baseball was America's pastime. 56
horse racing was America's pastime.
The sport of kings. So it is something that we've seen before. So it's a frustrating story, but it's something that I'm glad that we have Paulie Dangerous to cover here on the Sports Cubicle and, of course, on Baseball Weekend Journal. Paulie, any last thoughts as we wrap up this week in labor negotiations?
Yeah, I've got two things. One, I think even polo was considered a popular sport in the United States in the late 19th century.
Sure.
And to tack on that, I think I remember reading an article once that competitive walking was a sport. I remember reading some sort of article about how at Madison Square Garden in like the late 1800s, people would go. It was like a week-long walking thing. Like guys would sleep at night in the middle of the track, but then would just walk. And it wasn't so much that they were walking fast. It wasn't like the goal to be, I think, the fastest walker. It was like the most stylish walker, and I would love to go back and see what that looks like. But yes, in terms of the American pastime, baseball's no longer it. It's football. But I wanted to mention too that you talk about the season being delayed. Let's keep in mind that there needs to be at least 4 weeks of spring training, and that's a must, because I think we saw that the pandemic shortened season. What happened, with arms last year? You had guys like Max Scherzer couldn't make his last start in the playoffs because he had the dead arm. These guys are used to a certain amount of innings, and if you're playing with their routines and the way they train, you're not going to get the product that you want. You're not going to get the performance that you want out of them. So, we're going to have to see at least 4 weeks of spring training, and we're going to have the extreme madness of once the CBA is signed and official and everyone's allowed to talk to their organizations and the teams are allowed to talk to players again, it's going to be a mad scramble to sign up some of the remaining free agents. I mean, keep in mind, we don't know where Carlos Correa is going to play. We don't know where Chris Bryant's going to play. We don't know where Trevor Story is going to play. We don't know where Clayton Kershaw is going to play. We don't know where Freddie Freeman's going to play. That's 5 amazing players that I just named off right there. So, I mean, it's going to be one of the most chaotic baseball seasons that we've ever seen, regardless of how much they want to try and normalize the situation.
Make sure you check out all his work. Keep up to date with everything with the labor lockouts. And whenever it ends, the free agent frenzy that will be at Baseball Weekend Journal. And let us know on Twitter at Sports Cubicle TV, your favorite speed walker. It is Devin Tingle. It is Paul Chivari. It is Dan Marver. I'm Mike Mercado.